Thank you, SB. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay. Nice to be here. Everyone having a good time so far? All right, fantastic. And tomorrow, of course, the highlight, going through the Panama Canal. Wouldn't be a Panama cruise without the canal. And that's really special for me in a lot of different ways. In fact, maybe one of the biggest reasons is because many, many years ago, and I'm not going to say how many, my mother and father met on a cruise through the Panama Canal. So it made it pretty special for me. And in fact, they loved Panama so much that after they got married, they moved there. And that's where I was born. And I've had a chance to go back since then and enjoy it. And it has changed a lot and continues to change. In fact, let me ask this. Who has been to Panama before? Some of you, I'm going to guess. Okay, we have a lot of people that haven't. Okay, so we're going to talk about that, talk a little bit about the canal, some of the history of the canal, also some of the workings of the canal, and something really, really special that I think you're really going to enjoy, because I'm going to invite my special guest up here, who is Jim Bradley. Now, some of you may not have met Jim yet, but Jim worked on the Panama Canal, and my father also worked on the Panama Canal. And Jim spent many years in Panama, now lives in North Carolina. He's kind of like me. He migrated to the States. So he's going to share with us some of his information, some of his experience. Is there anyone else here who has ever lived or worked in Panama on the canal at all? No one? Okay, so we can probably tell you just about anything. You're going to believe it, I hope. Does that work? No. Okay, probably not. All right, okay, and so we're going to turn back the clocks, 1492. When we think of that date, what do we think of? What comes to mind? Columbus, right. Columbus discovered America. And when we say Columbus discovered America, I tend to think that maybe Columbus got a little more credit than he deserves. Because to me, it's a lot like when we first got on this ship and I told my wife, I discovered ice cream up on the 10th deck. And I'm going to guess that I was not the very first person to discover that ice cream. And I think there were some people there before me. And so that same thing is true when Columbus discovered what we call the New World. Other people had been there before. In fact, in Panama, there were probably about 200,000 people living in the region at the time. And a lot of the artifacts date back clear to 2500 BC. So a region that had been around for a long time and has a lot of history, but wasn't recorded like the Europeans. So they get a lot of credit for that. Also, who bankrolled Columbus's voyage? Spain, right. And so we see the Spanish influence, and speaking Spanish, and Spanish is the native language of Panama, although most Panamanians do speak English as well. And Spain, this is really interesting because Spain at that time was the most powerful country in the world. And so at that time, actually 2 years after Columbus came to the New World, and he actually came to Panama as well a few years later, but 2 years after he arrived, Spain decided, okay, we want this new area. And so they set up a treaty with the Pope and with Portugal, and so they claimed the entire Western Hemisphere. They didn't have a clue how big it was. They thought, yeah, we got these little islands and a few places like that. And it turned out to be incredibly large, and they didn't have a clue. But they were very powerful, so in a few years, they really took over. They conquered the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas, which were some very advanced civilizations at the time. So it really spread wide, and it was called the Spanish Main at that time. One of the big keys, of course, was Panama, because it wasn't long before they realized that, hey, this is a narrower area of land, really only less than 50 miles from one side to the other. And so they decided to explore this and see. And one of the first settlers there, named Balboa, decided to take an excursion across there and see what he could find. And they thought at the time, in fact, and what they found was a lot of dense jungle, and they found it was very hard to get through. He had some guides. He was able to make it in about 24 days, which was really exceptional. A lot of people weren't able to do that. So at that time, Spain sent some engineers in 1820 or 1524. They said, let's study this, see if it's possible to build a canal. Well, at that time it was so massive with the jungle, a lot of things they struggled with, some of the diseases, mosquitoes, snakes, spiders, and so forth. And so it was a real challenge. They decided this really wasn't going to work. Another problem that they had was all the water caused a lot of problems, slides and so forth. And by the way, I didn't mention, their plan was much like the Suez plan that they had originally. They said, we're just going to build a canal at sea level. So they're going to a big canal through the middle, and then they'll open the two ends, it'll go together, and hey, you can just cruise right through. Sounds like a great plan, but not so easy, because the terrain and all the mudslides and the challenges they had, plus their equipment at that time, really didn't meet the challenge for something like this. After 9 years, they abandoned all their equipment. They were broke. They had lost 20,000 workers. They had lost billions of dollars, and they were totally, totally defeated. In fact, they really kind of made scapegoats of de Lesseps and his son, who tried to tell him, Dad, don't do it. But unfortunately, that's the way it ended. Now, in America, there was one person who really saw the need for that, and that was Teddy Theodore Roosevelt. And he had really seen the need for this and some of the challenges. He was familiar with the area because he was really famous as the Rough Rider, leading the charge up San Juan Hill. So he was familiar with the area down here. And in fact, even at that time, he wished there had been some way to get through here so he could get support from the American fleet. So he saw a great need for this. He became president after McKinley was assassinated. And so his first order of progress was, I want to build this canal. And he was really, really hot on this idea. In fact, that's what he run so much. Now, at that time, Panama was a northern province of Colombia, much like where we were today. And so they really weren't that interested in selling any land to the United States or even giving them any particular rights. And we hadn't worked out a deal with them. Well, there was another plan kind of in the works, or maybe behind the scenes. And in this case, a lot of the businessmen in Panama staged a revolution, which was reportedly backed by the American government. Now, Roosevelt claimed that he did not have anything to do with it. And don't we always believe politicians? Okay, sure. And the fact that the U.S. fleet happened to show up right about that time to make sure that Colombians didn't have any involvement was just a mere coincidence? Okay, and a lot of people question about him. He continued to deny it until one time some reporters kept asking him, and finally he turned around, shook his head. In fact, does anybody remember what Roosevelt's phrase was, his favorite phrase? Yeah. Speak softly and carry a big stick. Unfortunately, that wasn't him. That was the advice he gave everyone. He spoke loudly. And at this time, he got upset and he said, I took the isthmus. Have you ever had one of those times when you thought to yourself, God, I wish I wouldn't have said that. I'm going to guess this is one of those times for Teddy, because that turned out to be 4 very expensive words. Because at that time, Colombia demanded some kind of restitution for this in the form of $25 million, which Teddy said, oh, well, it's worth it. What the heck, it's the government's money. At that point, then, it became kind of Teddy's canal. In a sense, it could be Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy's legacy. So he started work on the canal, and he became really connected with that canal. Right away, they drew up a hastily agreement. In fact, this is Roosevelt holding that agreement right now, an agreement for the United States to build, control that region, 10-mile strip wide, 50 miles long across the isthmus, to control the waterways and build the canal. One thing that a lot of people didn't realize at the time, that was the fact that no Panamanians ever signed the agreement. Interesting, I guess. But the canal was being built at that time. And This was John Stevens. He was the architect of the canal. He was America's most creative and most outstanding architect at the time, or engineer, I should say. And so he studied the whole thing, and he said, okay, Teddy, I've got a plan. And if I had heard this plan, I think I would have shaken my head. But he said, look, Teddy, here's the plan. We got this big river running through there, and that's kind of a challenge, so here's what we're going to do. Let's just build a big dam, flood the area, float boats across it. And you know, that's not a bad idea. And so they thought, well, this will work, right? And so that's what they decided to do. And along with that plan, he said, we're going to have a series of locks that'll raise it up to the gate. And in fact, there's even a cartoon, and you can sell anything with a cartoon, can't you? That'll always work. So that was the thought. Once they dammed it up, now it was going to raise it above sea level. So what happened was they had to have a series of locks to raise it from sea level 85 feet up to the level of the lake. But the great thing was, by flooding this, half of the canal was already built, so it avoided a lot of digging. So the plan began. And when Americans first arrived, they lived in housing like this. And the Americans, again, they hired a lot of Americans, sent them down there, but they also got a lot of workers from the local areas, from the islands down here, and they didn't have such good working conditions. Most of the island people were paid 90 cents a day, and they were charged 9 cents a meal for their food. So it wasn't great working conditions, and again, they struggled from some of the same issues they had before. So right away, they turned to Dr. William Gorges. They said, we've got a problem here with health issues, because they knew what the French had suffered with. And so Roosevelt was determined, and that wasn't going to happen again. The first thing they had to do was kind of start cleaning up the area, take care of the bugs, the standing water there. That was really treacherous. And they knew the mosquitoes were the real issue, along with a lot of the other things as well. They started clearing the area up. They drained all the standing water. They sprayed all the standing water with oil to keep the mosquitoes from breeding and spreading. They also treated all the areas, things that would help kill them. In fact, in the end, it was determined that it cost about $10 a mosquito to kill them. And when you think of what the money was back then, wow, that was a lot, especially when you consider how many mosquitoes there were. So quite a challenge. And then they would have the men drink quinine, liquid quinine, which found out would help treat them and prevent malaria. The yellow fever was a bit of a challenge, but again, by cleaning the area up and taking care of it,